I guess.
And we're live.
Okay.
Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome again to the conversations we're having all day today for Character Day. As before, you can follow along and ask questions and make comments at hashtag Character Day 2016. And we are having these conversations throughout the day. So every half an hour, there's a new one with a new luminary in this world of thought about character. And you're laughing about luminary, but
I think I'm a very dim light in the world of character education. But anyway,
okay.
go on.
We'll start from there. So this so self-described dim light is Dominic Randolph, who is the head of the Riverdale School in New York. And part of the reason we're talking to Dominic today is because he is in a very prestigious school in New York. And you would, I think, generally people identify prestigious school in New York with high pressure academics, et cetera, et cetera. But you're taking a very different approach and have a different philosophy about education than one might expect from a school like that. Can you tell us a little bit about your basic viewpoint on what kind of experience you want students to have at your school?
Right. I mean, I think that, if you look at all the research on, let's say, kids in schools and in university, there's an epidemic of sort of mental strife that's affecting young people. And I think it doesn't matter what school you're in, whether it's a school like mine or whether it's a public school or a charter school, whether it's a university. I think we're seeing more kids who are just not able to thrive and deal with some of the pressures that exist in schools. And there's a lot of pressures on these kids. So I think, not just purely academic, but just even social pressures. And I think that we need to provide them. I think some of the work that we've done with Angela Duckworth and David Levin at KIPP sort of believes that you need to sort of give people a booster shot to be able to deal with the challenging situation that young people find themselves in these days. And so I think it's, if you want people to perform very well on highly challenging things, which I think we all want our kids to be able to do that, I think you really need to focus on providing them with the type of strengths and capacities that they need in those types of situations, like grit, like optimism, like self-control. Those are sort of essential needs, I think. So the question comes to schools like ours and in schools in general is, how do you educate to that?
And I imagine becoming an accomplished test taker is not one of those skills that you're necessarily think is important.
I think there is a shift happening in education that's saying like, okay, it's all very well to push kids through some sort of credentialing system, and they jump through all the hoops that they need to. And, I have to give credit to some of these young people that they actually have an amazing tolerance to jump through those hoops. However, I'm not sure that that's actually doing much for their longer lives. And I think that's what happens is people, there's a sort of emptiness to that quest of just credentialing yourself for the next level of your life. And so I think, a lot of people like Marty Seligman, Chris Peterson, and a lot of people around this work talk about how do you get people to feel meaning and purpose in their lives. And all of these strengths basically lead to that idea, I think, of finding meaning and purpose.
And in some ways, you're almost sort of reverse engineering the idea of what, and this is happening somewhat in the parenting field as well, this idea that you're trying to create an environment for a student to emerge rather than trying to impose benchmarks of some kind to track their progress.
Yeah, and I think that, I was watching Wanda in the previous talk that you were having, and she was saying this notion of efficacy. The psychologists talk about a locus of control, that if you feel you're just basically doing what other people are doing, and it's basically all about extrinsic motivation, that's not probably a great way to live your life. If you want to do something significant with your life, if you want to do something that really counts. And so I think this is I do think this is sort of a watershed moment of schools, parents, us all thinking about what are we really doing? We don't just want to have, I think I use the term sort of fragile thoroughbreds. We don't want to really have people who are just sort of able to perform at a high level, but are so fragile that they can't handle any disappointment in their lives. And I think that we need to do a better job of that, starting with the youngest kids in all sectors. I actually don't think that Riverdale's really that specific. I think this is a question for all educators to be asking.
And it seems in some ways that, people who are looking for the best schools often are saying, I want my student to be successful. And are we reevaluating what this idea of successful is? Like, what does it mean to be successful as a human? Can you give a little bit of a sense of how we're reevaluating, as opposed to had a great job, had a family, what is that? Where are we leading with all of this character emphasis? I mean, are people happy all the time? What does this look like?
I think it gets interpreted in ways, that we're talking like sort of happiness pills, and if we're all walking around with sort of like smiles on our faces, everything is going to be better. I mean, I think that's really not what this is about. I think that I'm really struck by actually Bill Damon's work, who works at Stanford, and he's been studying the nature of purpose in people's lives and how purpose actually is something you sort of just like if you think about purpose, there's a sort of side of it that's actually personal, but there's also a side that's collective and that ties to sort of social good. And I think that actually is not such a bad quest. If we sort of like aimed our schools, and there's a lot of people that have been thinking about this recently, linked to the character strength thing of like, what would it mean to have more purposeful institutions, schools that actually had more of a sense of purpose and that sort of encouraged and sort of cultivated a capacity for purpose in kids. I think the way that it might get sort of misinterpreted, because a lot of this stuff can get misinterpreted, is sort of saying, okay, now what we want is everyone to be pre-med by the time they're sort of 5 years old or 6 years old. That's not what I'm saying. I think Bill Damon is very clear, like this notion that you might have different types of purpose, you have multiple purposes in your life, but actually having that feeling that you can be a really good family member or you can be a good team member really galvanizes one's life. And I think that's a very different mode than thinking about, okay, how can I get beyond this test? How can I get to this next, next sort of level of my life? Is a very different way of thinking about things than thinking about, let's say, trying to find meaning and purpose in your life.
It's interesting because it's sort of like we in business and in nonprofits and sort of in the general world, there's been this movement towards, mission statements, understanding what's your core value as a company. But it seems like we've been slower to apply that to ourselves. We sort of understand that a company has to have a mission and a purpose, but I don't know that people necessarily understand that about themselves as clearly.
Yeah, and Bill Damon, one of the points he makes is that teachers are probably it's one of the most purposeful professions that you can actually sort of take on, and yet how often as teachers do we actually explain and talk about our purpose to kids? I mean, I think about my daughter, and as I think about like, did I really actually have discussions about what my sense of purpose or lack of sense of purpose with her? I didn't really have that. And I think it's actually sort of a really interesting thing for us to all think about, even adults and children, to think about what does it mean to have a sense of purpose in one's life? And if you're not feeling that that's quite right, how do you shift that? What are the things you can do to shift that?
What do you think? I mean, it interests me too, because I think of, just imagining, millions of kids suddenly coming out of school with a sense of purpose. Does the culture exist around us to accommodate millions of people who want to live with a sense of purpose, or is there going to have to be a cultural shift to accept that new worldview so that people can live with purpose?
I do think. I mean, I actually feel that I'm lucky to be working with young people that actually are primed for this. I mean, I feel like I see a lot of young people, and even people who there seems to be more. Certainly more than when I was growing up, more involvement of youth in social issues and things of importance. Even things like, even like the presidential campaign with Bernie Sanders, it seemed to like sort of ignite a youthful movement around this. And so I actually think people are primed for it right now. I think the question comes is the sort of somewhat archaic world that we live in, willing to accept that purpose and you actually use that purpose in really strong ways. And I think that's a big question for our societies. I think it's very hard for young people who have this sort of enthusiasm and actually want to do good, and then find out that there's really the institutions in our world, the structures of our world are maybe not very receptive to that. So I do think actually, how is that going to change? I think it's an interesting question.
And I imagine as you're preparing students and working with them and to jump into this world, you must be giving them some sense of what it takes to continue to live with purpose, even though you're in this world where, I mean, there must be character traits that help you to keep that purpose in a world that maybe isn't as welcoming to that.
Right.
You know, like if you're a Bernie Sanders campaign supporter, he lost. what next? You know, like what next?
Yeah.
You know, like how do you keep that purpose?
So I think if purpose and sort of meaning are the North Stars, there are like ways, there are paths towards that. And I think the paths are filled with these character strengths. And I think they're filled with the idea, I mean, I guess the sort of title of what I'm speaking about is like, why character? In some ways, I think that, you know, if you view character as something you can grow, which I think is like, that's sort of borne out by the research, I think that's a very different model than some of the educational that I went through, you know, where it was basically like, you know, basically remediation, and said like, you know, you have these character flaws and we're going to remediate these character flaws. Sometimes by very unpleasant means. But, you know, I think this move to saying like, you've got strengths, how can we push those strengths along? How can we grow those strengths? I think that's a really big shift for kids. And I think even for the adults, I think, you know, so the thing is I love what you're doing, because I think that it's not just, you know, you could just hit on the schools and say, this is only the schools that have to pay attention to this, which I know that's one of your main audiences. But I also think it's the adults, it's the parents, it's the people in power that need to understand, like, some of the science that is coming up right now is changing the way we understand some of this stuff, the way that humans develop. And I think that's a really, really interesting shifting point. And I think we could take advantage of that.
Very cool. I'm just noticing that Tiffany is coming off of her other interview, so I'm going to bring her in.
Hey.
And take the
Tiffany,
headphones
how are you?
Okay, we're switching over here.
Yeah,
Hello.
there you go. Very nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
It's been a busy day. To put it mildly, look at what we've done. I mean, you were
I know, it's unbelievable.
From the very beginning. I mean, I have to kind of go back. They want to thank Arnie for doing that. While we have
Thank you.
But you and I, from the very beginning of this whole project. Yeah.
And it's quite a journey that you've gone on with everything. It's wonderful to see it expand like this. It's just crazy. You know, it's really cool.
Yeah, well, you've been so helpful. I mean, I remember actually reading the article in the New York Times on you and the work you've done at Riverdale. I think way before I started working on Science of Character. And I just remember being so struck with it. And then we started working on our film, The Science of Character. We got connected.
Right, exactly.
I think through Jackie. I'm trying to remember.
Yep, Jackie. It was actually Jackie. And then Angela and David were around that whole thing. And so that's
yeah. And yeah, it's just, you know, your work is so important, and you really set the stage, I think, for how it's done. And then so many people are now incorporating it. And now we have 90,000 events happening in 124 countries right now, which is
unbelievable. It's great. And it's great to see that people are really jazzed by this and doing sort of so many interesting things. It's just really great to see the tent keeps on expanding, which is really cool.
Well, that's been so fun. We're in the Twitter feed on Character Day 2016, and people are sending us photos from all over the world. I have to send you this video from the school in New Zealand. They did an event, and then they made a whole video, and it's just so creative.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, and you know, as we know, I mean, we're calling it Character Day, but it's character every day. It is, you know, there is just the excitement of everyone doing something together is so beautiful. And
I do think that you have to raise some of this to a level of attentionality. I think that sometimes it can get lost in thinking, like, you know, I mean, I think that one of the I was listening to you talking to Wanda, and I sometimes think that the word character, you can just sort of say character and good character, and it doesn't, you know, what does that actually mean?
What does it mean?
So I think somehow trying to become more explicit about this, you know, I think that's a really important part of what you're doing, is raising it to a level of sort of like consciousness, because I think a lot of the time we just assume it is there. And I think that's actually, even in schools, can be problematic.
Yeah, it's an interesting word. I mean, I'm super into words and how much power they have. And I think what was most exciting to me when I learned of Marty Seligman and Peterson's work on the strengths was breaking down and giving it words and a language too. Like, that's what we do. We need to name things, and then we can interact with them. when it's this amorphous word, even character day. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like, what do you, oh, I'm doing character day. What's character day? I wish I had a simple, we made a 1-minute trailer that seemed to work, but
Yeah.
now enough people understand it, so it's good. But it is, I love just seeing the words like social intelligence and honest kindness and humility. And once I start breaking it down, like, oh, these are all the parts of who we are. And there's actual strategies to build those parts.
Right, and there's an interesting, I mean, I do think there's an interesting debate going on as like, do you actually make things explicit like that versus do you just sort of build a, suffuse things in a sort of implicit character culture, right? And I actually think, I think that's sort of, I don't think actually think it's one or the other. I think you have to do both. I really do believe like it's a yes and, you have to do, you have to name things. You have to name things because I really do believe you have to define the terms, and you have to have it just sort of naturally supported by people modeling good character strengths within a community. People just when you observe it and see it just happening naturally, giving someone some good feedback on it. So I think it does have to be both cultural and explicit. I don't think it's like, I think there's a bit of a thing now about, should it be one or the other, or one's more effective than the other. I think it's actually both,
Well, it's been, I mean, being from outside of this education space. I mean, we've made a lot of films for educators for 20 years, but we're not immersed in the education world. And what was fun and funny to us in the sense of the different schools of thoughts were like, these are the strengths that are important. And these words, and we have R5 and we have, and to us it was like, wasn't that unusual? But we get it. But they're all interesting. They're all interesting.
Absolutely.
To us from the outside, they're all fascinating. The list of 24 is fascinating.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to go down and drill it down to study certain strengths. I mean, the whole thing is super interesting. And the more we talk about it and wrestle with it and engage with it, the more we're going to understand it and be able to, which is what humans do, is we give things words and then we play and then we wrestle and we build. So
exactly. And I think it's good to have very broad sense of this rather than trying to narrow down too quickly on things.
Yeah.
And
Has
come up
it
with
changed?
Formulas.
I mean, from when that article was written and failure and all that, and then now look at where we are. It's like it's talked about. I mean, it's so funny. Like it's in the. How has your thoughts about it changed? Being you were at the forefront of this whole movement.
I think that I mean, it's clear to me that it's like so important. Like I really do believe, like I haven't changed like anything from then when I was sort of like really being like sort of, I believe it's absolutely essential. I think that the thing probably that has changed in my head is that it's really hard. Like it's not easy stuff to do, and it's very interestingly, like really, as you said, it's like so totally with the culture and like what people are interested in and whatever. And yet at the same time, it's also really hard to do. And there are some people who sort of like doubt things and sort of like have, I mean, I think there's some people with good questions about it. I'm not sure that it's that, I think the sort of debate around it, I'm not sure there should be that much debate around it. I sort of feel like committed to it. I sort of feel like, if you really don't believe this, it's almost like I'm negating being human, sort of weirdly.
Completely.
I don't get like I'm not sure, I try to empathetically and fair-mindedly sort of understand opposing points of view. But, I just think that it's good that people are focused on it. I know there's a lot of sort of, sometimes there's weird stuff out there and whatever, but I do think the scientists are focused on it. I think it's all really positive. I don't understand why it hasn't got like attracted more interest, let's say at the policy level in the United States.
Yes.
There are other countries that are far more advanced on this.
Well, I was talking with Marty Seligman earlier, which was great. He was wonderful.
Right.
And I went to the IPEN conference, which I thought I was going to hang with you there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't get there. I was trying.
Can't be everywhere. But what was so fun for me is Marty had been invited to go to Australia a while ago and did a sabbatical there. and he keeps going back there. I mean, and so they have so deeply, the seeds of his ideas are trees in Australia. It is integrated in a policy level from the inside out. It is part of policy now and in education.
Absolutely.
It was amazing to see. Before I learned this, God, Australia, it's amazing. You have it integrated into the government and ministry.
Even in the UK, you know, I would
there
say
was a lot
the
of people
UK is
there. Yeah.
the UK has definitely got it part as the policy discussion at the governmental level. And, you know, the weird thing is a lot of the, not all, but a lot of the researchers are really, you know, US based and tend to be American.
Well, I saw somebody tweet about Character Day last night that only 50% of the schools in the United States teach character education.
Right.
I didn't, it was a tweet that went by, so I was like, where did that come from? And
right.
Is that around the number? I mean, it's definitely changed because it's changing. I feel like we're really in our 4th year of doing this work, even though it's the 3rd annual Character Day. We were working on the film for a year beforehand.
Right.
It just feels like, you know, it's like when I started the Webby Awards and the web, everyone's like, what's this web? And, you know, we're doing the Webbies, and soon you just feel it's everywhere. And I do feel like we're at the zeitgeist moment.
Absolutely.
With character, but it surprised me that it was still 50%, just 50%. Does that sound right to you?
It could be right. I mean, I think that some people feel that they do it just sort of like they wake up in the morning, it just happens. And
right,
that's where I think
focused on it. They're not
focused on it. They just feel like that's part of schools and it just sort of happens. And, you know, just sort of, we've always believed in character. And I think that's where that sort of level of intentionality, you know, this sort of notion that you've got to name things, you've got to explicitly give people strategies of how can you grow these strengths, even change the concept of, you know, a lot of kids and I think a lot of adults believe that they sort of, you know, I'm born with the personality I have. I can't really change my behaviors. I can't really change the way I am. And I think that, you know, that whole notion of a growth mindset, I think is such a strong thing. And I think how you get people to reframe that, I don't think we've done enough work on reframing that for kids, families, adults in this world. I think there's a lot of people who really believed it's sort of fixed. And so I think changing that assumption, changing the nature, I think there's a lot of work still to be done there, you know. And
I'm glad you're at the forefront of doing that work. And they just told me that the time is up. I always love talking to you. Next time you're in San Francisco, let me know, and I'm going to be in New York. I know we're
absolutely.
Thank you.
And if people want to reach out and connect, please feel free to reach out to me and connect, and I'll be happy to send things along or give people more information of what we're doing.
Tell the online community how people can find you.
So you can find me on Twitter at DAR17. You can find me on our website. My email is right there. So if you can look at the website, you can see what's going on, drandolph@riverdale.edu. Feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to connect you with some of the things that we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And thank you, Tiffany, and your team for what you do. It's just great. It's just like,
wait, can I do a little, my team has been working so hard. I'm going to like do a little, like, I'm showing, this is, woo! Everyone hasn't slept in weeks.
Yeah. Gratitude's like a key strength, and I give gratitude to you and your team, like, for what you're doing. It's great.
Somebody said, I think it was Wanda, or I don't know, it's all a little bit, a lot of people, but somebody was saying how you need to acknowledge to your kids more when things are hard. Like, you know, like walk them through it.
Show them,
And I think at least when we work really hard on an event, it looks I like to show a little bit. We call it the loosey-goosiness because it's not perfect. We are doing a lot of things over here. We are working really hard, but there's a loosey-goosey nature of this because we have 90,000 events happening, and I'm being told to wrap this up.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Take care.